All right, I'm Mark Harvey, and I want to welcome everybody to our session on engaging online students. I am the director of the MBA program, and yes, of course, part of the larger DBIT division. I've been here at the University of St. Mary for almost 13 years now, and hey, it's been a great run. I teach courses in global management, leadership, org management, stuff like that, so economics. I teach a lot of in-person classes at the master's level, MBA, a little bit on the undergrad, but I still do a lot of online courses too. We have MBA program, you can take courses online, in-person, or a combination of both, so I have to be able to do both sometimes. And oh yeah, I guess, yeah, I like active learning too, so that's why I'm here. I've published a book on it, and there's another book that I'm getting off to the publisher before the end of March.
Why don't we go on and get started with our questions? So our first question here is, why is creating community in online courses so important right now?
It was said at the beginning of this faculty institute that students need to find their tribe, right? That's especially true with undergraduates. I think it's still true for master's students, although perhaps to a lesser extent, because you have, when you're in a master's course, you're focused kind of on this one thing, and it's hard, and everybody's sort of like thrown in it together, and it does sort of have this kind of camaraderie and community sort of built in. But I do think that online is a unique challenge. When you don't have that regular in-person check-in, the instructor sometimes seems distant. It seems like somebody that, maybe they can't reach out to as easily. And so, the methods I think we can probably go into in a little bit. You have a question coming up probably on best ways, best practices, and so on, and we talk a little bit about that. But, it is important for those reasons, because, like I said, they need to find a tribe, and because the environment inherently doesn't really suggest a connectivity nearly as much. I might add as well that, the success of a program and retention, I think, relies a lot on how people connect with each other. And so finding ways to do that, I think, is really important. Most students who want to talk to me about getting into the master's program are interested in in-person learning. So it's kind of the opposite of what you're experiencing. It's like they're zoomed out, they're done, they want to be someplace in person, and they believe they're going to have more meaningful experience, and they're seeking out that community in a way. Now, they're not seeking out community in the way of like, we want to go to basketball games or we want to do this sort of thing. It's a class community, and they're there for 4 hours at night, at least in my program, and that's a pretty intensive sort of experience they're having every week in and out. And so that community naturally gets built. But you're right, then there's the people who really want asynchronous online. They don't want to be someplace. They don't want that kind of a commitment. And so how to get those people engaged in any way beyond just turning in their assignments is the challenge I think that Roger's really talking about.
That brings us to our next question. What strategies, what challenges, or what do you use to bring that community in?
So methods. There are a few things that I do. First of all, I think Roger mentioned a video, right? Like, I do regular videos for my students, okay? And I actually host them on YouTube. So what I do is I will record entire class lectures and then break them down into smaller bits, produce them into shortish videos. And by shortish, I mean really anywhere between 5 minutes and 30 minutes. So some of them are longish, right? But they're set up to be like, and it's not just me lecturing. I'll give a little introduction, say, okay, this is what this video is about. It's for the public as well. Anybody who wants to learn from me, they go to my YouTube channel, they check it out. But then when I'm teaching those online courses, I can take those things and stick those in the courses and like say, hey, if you want to see what I'm like in class, if you want to learn this stuff from me, if this would enhance your textbook experience, then come check this out. And students have really responded positively like that. And I don't know I'm sure you've had this experience before where you have a favorite TV show and you watch this show and you get into the characters so you know their personalities and stuff, but do these people know you at all whatsoever? Not really, right? My students know me better than I know them. Now, granted, like Michelle, I get to know my students, but like they pick up on stuff and they pay attention and they connect to me in a way that, that is unique, it's different. So I think that's a really effective way. Now, it's time intensive, right? The good news is, though, is that, these videos might be able to last a while, especially if you're talking about content that is not extremely time sensitive, right? So every now and then, like when I'm teaching, global management, international political economy, something like that, I have to update those videos because things change in the world, and so that happens, right? But you can still get a long shelf life out of those sorts of things. Second thing I think is a really good tool is to do games, simulations, things like that. I'm looking at Kyle Anthony in the back of the room. He's the king of this kind of stuff. Dude, you're awesome at this, man.
Yes.
Anything that allows the students to do something other than just read and regurgitate and write essays and stuff like that, I think is good. Now, I do think that's much harder in the online classroom than it is in person, right? So that's sort of its own whole discussion that we could have. But it's an area I've grown into, not just in the classroom, but also in terms of the literature. I published an edited volume on this a few years ago. I've got another book coming out, hopefully to the publisher before the end of the month. So if anybody wants to talk to me about different ways to engage people in terms of that, I'd be happy to talk about that. Final thing I will say is that I try to, when possible, mix my online and my in-person classes. So what I have done is if I've got the same sections of a class, both online and in person at the same time, I will tell the online people, hey, if you want to Zoom during this time period, right, I will Zoom you in. You don't have to do the discussion forums this week. You're exempted from that. As long as you actively take a role in our class discussion, then you're a part of that. And then the students actually form a community with the people in the on-ground classroom, and that's kind of a cool experience. And so anybody who wants something synchronous, I have increasingly been allowed them a synchronous option, because there are people who chose this university not because they wanted asynchronous, but because they just didn't have a better access point to something they could have in person, right? And so a lot of students are responding very positively to that. Like, I want to be in a classroom. Thank you for opening this Zoom to me. I want my professors to be very responsive to students. And if a student calls up and says, hey, I want a phone call, or I want a Zoom, or I want you to explain something to me, then that's really what I want the instructors. And again, like I said, I have a bunch of adjuncts that I work with, but that's where my expectations are. That's what I am willing to do, because sometimes the way I create community is going to have to be that personal meeting, that personal talk.
Are discussion forums still a viable way to foster peer-to-peer engagement and foster a sense of community, or not?
I used to think discussion forums are awesome. I do believe they grow tedious if you do them a lot over time. Having said that, I do think that they are a good pedagogical tool if they are set up in a way and administered in a way that could be very effective. First of all, I think you need to design them well, right? And that is, you don't just use a discussion forum for just anything. So a lot of the least successful discussion posts, discussion forums I have seen, and by the way, I have observed a lot of other teachers building and doing this stuff based on the job that I have in the program. The least effective ones usually are ones where they're asking the students to fill in a blank, or just provide information, or share an essay, or something like that, right? The most effective ones are where you're talking about a topic where there's multiple perspectives and there is something to be argued there. If you have something that's got a broad opportunity for people to take different positions, then it's just inherently going to be more successful. It's going to provoke more discussion, and you're going to get a lot more personal information, personal feelings about that. It's not foolproof, but I would say if you're using a discussion forum just as a glorified opportunity to submit an assignment, then it is probably a waste of time. You might as well just have the student submit the assignment. That's a key question I always have, is like, is it going to benefit the other students, to see what this person has just done? And if the answer is yes, then it might be good on a discussion forum. And if no, then it's probably an assignment. For another thing, I think you need to have absolutely clear standards of what is expected in that discussion forum, and then enforce them, attach a grade to it, right? If you want a minimum of 300 words, then you better be counting the words. And if they do less, then you probably need to penalize them so they get up to that point, right? If you demand a certain number of sources or a certain whatever. Now, the problem with that is now we've formalized this thing to the point where it's not fun or spontaneous, but it is pedagogically helpful, okay? Now, the other end that I've sometimes played with is, and especially like in the hybrid courses that we do in Overland Park, where we do have some elements of online stuff, is you ask those same kinds of questions, but you don't put the same requirements on it. You make it more of a free flow. Now, I will say that that's probably more effective with master's students than it may be with undergrads. Getting undergrads to, you would have to incentivize them, right? Mm-hmm. But I do think that making things a little bit looser, especially if you introduce a topic that might be interesting to them, that might stimulate their discussion naturally, then that might be a good way to create community, but also to try to, get them just talking about the subject and learning about it in a way that's a little more low pressure. We have used other videos in a discussion format as a variety, some alternative. And so I do think you're right. For some students, it's easier to respond in videos than it is to write something out. And I think it's nice to mix that up sometimes. So that's one suggestion. Previous session was he suggested doing show and tell style discussion forums. The idea being that you ask somebody a question and then have them come up with some content that they're bringing to the discussion forum, like, show some commercials that illustrate. He was talking about like security during 9/11 or whatever, and it was a history-oriented thing. And
like YouTube videos.
Right, videos. Yeah, so ask them some content that relates to whatever subject matter you're talking about this week. Ask them to bring it in, ask them to interact with it, ask them to interact with others' media that they share as well. So, then it becomes more of an exploratory kind of discussion-y sort of experience, as opposed to just like I'm posting an essay and I got to respond to a couple of people.
That kind of brings me to our last question. What are ways instructors may help students who are overloaded and disconnected, especially when juggling various distractions while learning from home?
In all of our courses, we have everything open from beginning to end, so people can flexibly work on things early if they need to. On the other hand, though, I tend to be very strict with deadlines, where, there are penalties, they do have to get stuff done on time, and it's not just for the sake of doing it. It's because that if they don't, in an accelerated course, a lot of these online courses are 8 weeks, mine certainly are. Mm-hmm. It's hard to get that much stuff done in 8 weeks unless they pace it properly. Mm-hmm. And so that's not to say I won't be flexible, right? If an adult learner is going to come up to me and say, hey, something crazy happened this week, now I got to get called out of town, or something's happened with the kids, the family, or whatever, right? And I'll ask them, okay, so what date can you have this in? Well, this is your new deadline now, right? I'm happy to be flexible with them, but we can't also have a schedule that's just completely loose, or else what happens with some people is they get busy, they get behind, week 7 comes along, and they're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And nothing's there, and they won't have a quality learning experience. And so that's a really important thing to remember too, is that we want to be flexible, but we also have to give them guardrails, or else they will fly away and they won't get the benefit of a good solid education as well. The final thing I'll say on this is just to kind of go back to what we were talking about earlier, is I think that personal interaction is really, really important, making yourself available for them. Like if there are students and I haven't heard from them for a week, then I probably better reach out, send them a little email, hey, is everything okay, or whatever. Being open to talk to them or listen to them or figure this out. So that's important too.
If there are no more questions or comments, then thank you all for your time.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.